This is The Poet Speaks, a show all about oral tradition.
Hip-hop and cardboard boxes on the block, reggaeton, bandolero, soy yo, heavy metal, punk rock, and la junior high pop.
And what makes poetry so amazing, so incredible, is its absolute fascination and ability to change our lives. The oral tradition, the reason why we speak. This is The Poet Speaks. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Poet Speaks podcast. Now, our next guest is someone whose work truly bridges the personal and the political. A poet who reminds us that identity, belonging, and home are not fixed places, but living poems we keep rewriting. He's the 5th inaugural poet of the United States, the author of How to Love a Country, and a voice that continues to define the American experience in all its beauty and all of its great, great complexities. Everyone, please welcome to the Poet Speaks podcast, Richard Blanco. Richard, how are you?
Great. Thanks, Amanda. It's wonderful to be here. Great intro.
Hey, no problem. No problem. I feel like an intro it makes you feel good, don't it? Makes you feel good before you get into some questions,
Yeah.
right? Absolutely.
Covers a lot of ground.
There we go. That's what the intro's for. So tell us, before we begin, I want to know, where are you currently at? Where are we talking to you in the world as of right now?
I'm in Miami, Florida, in the same house I grew up in, at my mother's house. So I'm teaching at Florida International University this semester, and I'm sort of just living with my mom. She's 89, and just sort of keeping tabs on her, make sure she's okay. So that's where I am, back home, my home city.
Wow. Okay. But now you're a born and bred Miami boy, right? Miami, right?
Almost. I got here when I was 4 years old. I was born in Madrid, actually, and I got to the United States when I was 45 days old, first in New York City.
Wow.
And then eventually we moved to Miami, which was a typical sort of route for a lot of Cuban exiles. You know, in 1968 in Miami, there wasn't as much opportunity as there was up in the Northeast. So, but yes, and so you could say it's about as native as a Miamian gets.
Wow, amazing. Now, okay, before we get into that, I mean, you have such a long breath, like you said, of your childhood, growing up. You have such a long breath of so much of where you've been to get to where you are today. But you know what? I kind of want to start off this question. I want to start off with this question because I know you have said your life's obsession has been the word home, right? That you're, as you said right now, you're made in Cuba, assembled in Spain, imported to the US. Now, after all these years, Richard, and you've probably written thousands upon thousands of poems now. I mean, what does home even still mean to you? I mean, does it still feel like a question? Or do you think, you finally found that answer within, your body, or even as, your latest piece of poetry, the latest piece that you're offering the world suggests? What is home even now for you?
Yeah, sure. Great question. Asking what's home is like asking what is love. Really, it's such a big word, and so it's changed over time. It's changed because I've changed. It's changed because circumstances have changed. Like everything in life, we grow, we mature, and whatnot. So I'll try to be brief, but so there's been very distinct phases, and each one of these are sort of marked by a book. The very first book was really the question of home, more anchored in cultural identity, right? Being a Cuban American and sort of that investigation, going to Cuba for the first time, understanding the motherland, so to speak. Then after I started reading some revisionist history, I became a little bit of an America basher, and I just wanted to be Cuban all the way. That's my real country. I got to do whatever it takes to sort of make sure Cuba is a free and democratic country and whatnot. So that was a phase, but that was also, of course, beyond my control. So eventually I moved from the Republic of Miami to Hartford, Connecticut, my first teaching job, which was this big, I was thinking New England. Okay, finally going to the real America, right? And sort of thinking about what that means. And that's partly my second book. And then, of course, that fantasy of that real American story is exactly that. It's a romanticized version of what immigrants grow up with, right? So I started traveling a lot. And in those travels with that same question, where's home? So I started writing a lot about more cosmopolitan sense of what home might be. Home might be Venice, home might be London, home might be uh, somewhere in between. And then I had put the question of home a little bit to rest. As the poet Basho said, life is a journey and the journey itself is home. But then when the White House called for me to write a poem, which was basically the assignment was write a poem for America, I wrote all those questions of am I even American? What does that mean? All those questions resurfaced. And in a way, the poem is an answer to those questions in the affirmative, saying, no, damn it, I am part of this narrative. We are all part of this narrative. And then since then, like you said, the latest book has been yet the latest iteration of what my sense of home is. And I'm realizing that I've never lost home and I've never maybe even gained one, but that home is the sum total of all one's experiences, which are beautiful in their own way. But, you can't necessarily reclaim some of these spaces anymore, but they still live in you and your body. And that's why the book is called Homeland of My Body. So I've turned from outward, sort of looking inward and saying, no, all that is always with me. And who knows what the next phase will be.
Yeah. When I hear that, it's kind of something that you said, like kind of ripped out to me. And I think a lot of people can relate that have that immigrant, child of immigrants, whatever that looks like, first generation entering into this new country. You had said you had moved to, what was it, Connecticut, and you felt like, okay, I'm actually part of America. Could you expand a little bit more on what that kind of meant what you mean when you say that?
Sure. Well, I mean, for anybody out there who's ever visited Miami for an extended period of time, Miami is kind of a cultural bubble, right? It's a very Latinized city, and so you sort of grow up sort of not feeling like the other really in some weird way, but the otherness comes like, no, I want to be that person on TV. I want to be, or to think that is that the Brady Bunch is the real America, or that. All these sitcom or the foods you would see on TV that we didn't grow up with, like easy cheese. So, this mythology of what is the real American, because in a weird way, it's ironic, but because you're surrounded by more or less like 98% of my class was Cuban or Latinx folks, just like me. So, as human nature, you in a weird way, you exoticize, if that's the word, that Americanness, which usually, Latinos get exoticized themselves by other people, right? Or stereotyped. So I had a stereotypic vision of what it meant to be America that was still with me, even during the inauguration when they asked me to write the poem. There was still a part of me that well, am I really part of this American narrative? I kind of feel like it, but am I really part of this country not only as an immigrant, but as a gay man as well? And so yeah, I went up north looking for that.
Yeah.
The sleigh rides in the snow and the little white picket fence and not to say that parts of that weren't there, right? But it's certainly I call it the exile of my exile, because I felt like I was in this country I didn't really know at all. I thought I would know from again stereotypes, but yeah.
No, that's so fascinating. I mean, you are correct. Miami versus Connecticut. I mean, like down south versus up east. I mean, that's part of really that part of the United States that's, very Boston, that kind of I don't know how to say this politically correct, but maybe a bit Yankee, 13 colonies. You definitely do have that type of vibe. No, I love that you said that though, because I did think that's very honest. Now, before we kind of move on, I want to say this too, so you were an engineer before you were even a full-time poet. I mean, so that is such I guess off first rip, when you first hear that, anyone's going to just say, hey, those are two completely 180 different sides of the coin in terms of a career. But how do you see that? Tell us, how did you even transition? Was it something just in your heart that you wanted to just be a full-time poet full-time writer, wordsmith, or was engineering, I mean, was that something you were passionate about? Tell us a bit about how you made that career transition.
Yeah, I mean that's also tied. All these stories sort of intersect, and that also ties into being an immigrant by 45 days, but also growing up in an immigrant family. So of course, a working class immigrant, lower working class immigrant family. So I didn't have much exposure to the arts or the humanities or anything like that. Plus, of course, there's the more those immigrant values or of you're going to study something, solid so that you can make a better living than us, that
Yeah.
kind of thing, which I think exists in other families as well. The more traditional, but especially it's really emphasized in the immigrant community. And then there's also a cultural divide because since what little my parents knew about arts and humanities had to do with Cuba. My parents didn't even know who Robert Frost was or the Rolling Stones for that matter. So there's no they couldn't even foster that even if they wanted to. And then my grandmother was my primary caretaker. And she was very homophobic, and so at one time I wanted to study architecture, and she thought that was too gay. So my choices in the arts that wasn't encouraged from that point of view either. But I was great at math. I was always a left brain, right brain kind of kid, one of those obnoxious kids that got A's or A minuses in everything except physical education. So I really didn't know what exactly I'd study, but I was like, well, why not do engineering? And I thought the plan was to get my degree in engineering, specialize in structural engineering, go on to get a master's in architecture. Along the way, that obviously didn't happen. And it was really engineering that paved the road to poetry, pardon the pun. But I didn't realize half my job was writing letters and reports and studies and proposals, which were the lifeblood of a consulting firm. And these are just narratives. But also thinking about audience and tone and word choice and diction and connotations and all this stuff really made me dive deep into language. And I always knew I wanted to do something creative. I just didn't know what that would be. But that triggered something. And what it triggered was a love for language that I realized went back to, I never remember not knowing two languages since as far as I can remember, I was the first one to effectively learn English in my family. And so I remember translating for my parents when I was 4 or 5 years old. And I realized that language, I think that imprinted in me, and I didn't take language for granted. Language wasn't just something you communicate with, but it was a way of seeing the world. There was power in language. I mean, your parents are your linguistic mercy, in certain situations. And I think that was that clicked on. But I really I love both. And of course, by necessity, I've been a practicing civil engineer and poet for most of my adult life. Really, the big break was, of course, becoming a presidential inaugural poet, which was a game changer. But like most artists, we have to find, some other means of a livelihood. But I loved it. I think there was an interesting balance because when I was having a bad poetry day, I designed a bridge. When I was having a bad engineering day, I'd just write poetry at work all day. And I think it was a healthy balance. And I always tell my students in my undergraduate class, listen, even if you don't go on to become a poet, keep some art in your life always, because it freshens your mind. It gives you new ideas for whatever your career might be. But yeah, that's kind of what had happened. I mean, you said the key word was as careers, they're very different, but on the other hand, I think as, designing is a very creative endeavor. Sometimes when I'm designing something, I feel the same sort of juices flowing as when I'm designing a poem. And it's like I like to say, I create a bridge and I design a poem. It's not, those two things aren't mutually exclusive. But yes, as careers, they're very different, obviously. But I've carried them both, and proudly.
Yeah. No, what I love about that too is, you really you expressed how a lot of them, again, people from the outside looking in without the critical thinking lens think they're two different things. But like you said, that's the lifeblood of consulting at a firm, right? Writing those proposals. And it's the same thing with, a lawyer in a courtroom is using poetry to present or defend their case, right? A doctor is, you're using poetry to, make the language translatable to their patient, right? So many people just don't put that into the world lens of so much of what we do is so aligned. It doesn't have to be so different than what we're really thinking. Even as a person, let's say you do finance, there's poetry in that, you know what I mean? Trying to explain numbers, crunching numbers, et cetera, et cetera. So I really, really do love that. And it's this kind of metaphor, again, like you say, your poems, they're still building those bridges just in a different way, or maybe even in the same way.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think almost every human endeavor comes down to written and oral communication skills to be successful. But also, it's also about synthesis of knowledge rather than this sort of specialization. And unfortunately, our educational system generally still silos everything, right?
Yeah.
Gives you too much of one thing and not enough across the board. And this is a whole other conversation, but that's what they're finding out with AI now, that really specializing is really not a good idea anymore. You have to be a generalist to be able to really, that's where the future is and where the arts and humanities are really going to matter. But it's also a two-way street. Like, people don't realize how much left brain work there is in creating a poem, right? Especially in the later stages, right? But a lot of times when I'm writing a poem, I'm looking for some kind of internal logic. I'm looking for a pattern. I'm looking for structure. I'm looking how to break that structure, right? And at the beginning, it's much more, right? Just cigarettes and martinis, but there comes a point where you're actually you're left braining the poem at some point, right? So that's also true. And the same happens when you create a bridge. That you begin a bridge with just sort of an unknown, a bunch of unknowns that you start trying to put together and stitch together into a design. And sometimes there's many failures, right? And you got to start it over again, or you have to redirect in the middle of all that. And I think, we're all left brain and right brain. I think we just don't always know that.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Or don't realize we're practicing it already.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, moving along here just a bit now. So Richard, I mean, when just this regular guy named President Barack Obama just chose you as his inaugural poet, I mean, your words literally became part of national consciousness. I actually do remember actually seeing you. I was like a kid. I remember seeing that was when he was elected, all those things. So I do remember seeing that on TV, just so you know. So, I mean, that was part of the national consciousness. And you at the time, I mean, you were the youngest inaugural poet. Is that correct? At that time. And you were the first openly gay man at that time to be the inaugural poet. I mean, you had a lot of firsts. That was the gravity of that moment. Again, you became part of the national lexicon. I mean, what did it mean to craft the poem that you made, one today, knowing it would speak for a country, especially at that time, very divided? I mean, and kind of what did you want to leave? What was the mark you wanted to leave there well, first off, I want to say, what was that call like? Where do you even get that call? Does someone call from a burner phone? How the heck does how does someone even get, we really need to know. I mean, that's what people really want to know. How do you even get that call?
Right. There's I will add, though, I was also the first engineer, but that wasn't sexy enough.
Yes, sir. Right.
But they didn't highlight that too much. Actually, I was just driving. I was driving from New York to my home in Maine, and I just get this phone call, which is weird because I have phone phobia. I rarely pick up the phone, but I was stuck in traffic, and I thought, what the hell? And I thought it was a practical joke. I didn't understand what they were saying.
Wow.
It was like, and because nobody, this isn't something you apply for. It isn't something that you're shortlisted for, you're finalist. This is literally out of the blue, and they have your phone number. But so the person said finally, she said, no, like Robert Frost and Maya Angelou. I'm like, oh, okay. So you can imagine, I'm like, is this like some kind of dream? And I still didn't believe it. So I pulled over the side of the road and I I Googled the person's name, and sure enough, it came up, said Presidential Inaugural Committee.
Wow.
Um, my response, my immediate response was a little surprising for me. I just felt overcome with this incredible sense of gratitude.
Mm.
And not because, oh, I was elected, I mean, chosen to be this thing, but just thinking about, again, all these stories intersect, right? The choices, my mother leaving Cuba, pregnant with me, the choices my parents made for me, all the sacrifices, the typical sort of immigrant story, their belief in education, that all this stuff was, that this moment was only really possible because of all the love and guidance that they gave me, and my grandparents and my community at large, and my extended family. And so it was this sense of, wow, we think that we were writing our own story after, when we get in our late teens, right? Or maybe even earlier. We don't realize that a lot of that story has already been, or the foundations of that story has already been written by the people around you, people that love and nurture you. So that was a beautiful, beautiful feeling, the whole world transfixed. Then came the sheer terror of they asked me to write 3 poems and in 3 weeks. So,
Wow.
which is not, I usually write a poem a week as a draft, but arguably not the most important poem of my life. And so the first poem was it was all right, but I think it was more of a warm up. The second
Mm.
poem was one today. And to get to that second point, yeah, second poem, like we were talking about earlier, there was something that was blocking me. It was a lot of writing poetry, right? When you're not asking the questions that you're afraid to ask, right?
Mm.
And you're not going there. And the question was, am I even part of this country? Do I even love this country enough to write a poem for? And does this country love me back? Right.
Yeah.
And again, that the poem is in many ways, is a response to that in the affirmative. That yes, where all our narratives are, it's in our motto, out of the many, one. So that gave me a through line to the poem, and something I felt I could really believe in. A little small anecdote too. My very first creative writing assignment in my very first creative writing class, with my mentor, who's still my mentor and now my colleague to this day. We read some Frost and Ginsberg and Whitman, and my assignment was write a poem about America.
Mm.
So in a way, that became the first poem in my first book, and in a way, I've been writing that poem all my life by questioning what it means to be American and what does it mean to be Cuban, which are kind of the same question, right? Like, what is identity? What is country? What is home? What is belonging? What is identity? So I called my mentor, said I got the same assignment only from the president.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah. No, that's amazing. And I wonder, at the time, did you let the gravity of that moment sink in fully, or was it you had to wait some time after, maybe weeks, months after, to really realize the momentum, the hugeness of that moment for you?
Yeah, I really, I really didn't, because there's just 3 poems in 3 weeks. A lot of things shifted, and
Yeah.
a lot of help, and including my husband and other friends, and hiring people to just let me write the poem, right, to take care of the logistics and all that. So I was just go, 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 right. The most important to me thing, it was, of course, write the best poem you can, right. And so when it really kind of hit me, was when I was waiting to be called up to the podium, and I took my mother with me. I had other guests, but you can only take one person, like, right
Yes.
next to you. So in the platform there, and it was the first time that I was, the poems are done, I'm ready, I've had the sound check, where I could finally just breathe and take in the moment.
Yeah.
Like it was like, oh my God, like a gay immigrant kid is going to read a poem to the whole country. And it's me. But it wasn't fear. It was more like, it was this feeling of, I'm looking at my mother, who grew up in a dirt floor home in Cuba, right? It was this
Mm.
feeling of but really the most beautiful things about this country, it was this feeling of, you feel a reverence in that inauguration. Yeah, it's about Obama, but really you feel like that really defines our democracy, where it's the sense that you're in service to something much bigger than yourself. And so in some ways that kind of shifted from nervousness to sort of just this sense of where the ego goes away. You know, it's just kind of like, no, this is for us. And yeah, it's part of the poem already, because, you know, I always say my poems are smarter than me. They're already sort of telling me what I'm going to feel.
Mm.
But, you know, it's I wrote a small memoir of it, a memoirette, I call it. It's called One Today for All of Us. Uh, no, I can't forget it. One Today for all. No, what is it? One Today, the Inaugural Poet's Journey.
Mm.
And I did that because I had never had this. After I'm flying home, it just now it hit me like what really happened,
Yeah.
right? This is huge. I thought I was just going to go home and get the mail and walk the dog, because, you know, nobody reads poetry. Like, I thought my life would just go on the way it was, but it suddenly hit me, and it was so fast. So I get the call on December 12th. The inauguration is on January 21st. So it's the
Wow.
first time I
So fast.
write a book just out of this sheer impulse to write it down, to make sure it happened. Like, make sure it happened, like, and
Mm.
remember it, because it all seemed so quick, and was quick. And I also thought, for God's sake, the next person that becomes an inaugural poet should know a little bit about what to expect. So when I got a chance to, when Amanda Gorman was chosen, I got a chance to speak with her. I sent her the book. I told her, you know, sort of shared, like, you know, we sort of compared notes about the call and all that, because I mean, I never got to talk to Maya Angelou. I talked a little bit to Elizabeth Alexander, which is my predecessor. And now there's only three of us alive. And like my husband says, more people have been to the moon than have been presidential inaugural poets. So it's a feeling that you can't just sort of call a friend and say, like, hey, last time you read it. But anyway,
Yeah.
but yeah, that's when it really was like, you know, okay, something shifted, right?
Yeah.
And I just wanted to record that with the written word, which is what I do.
Tell me a bit about too, you know, again, we think of that day, and you know, obviously, like you talked about, it's such a select club of people and such amazing people that have been able to do it. Tell me, you had mentioned earlier, you had given kind of segue to this next question. You said basically, I mean, it was a game changer for you in terms of your writing career. I mean, for those that are listening, you know, a lot of people, you know, they may not see poetry as viable career wise. Tell us, I mean, you know, just out of my own curiosity too, tell us what kind of roller coaster were you able to go on in terms of your career in poetry after having such a big honor like that? What did that look like that you'd be willing to share?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, it's arguably, right, the most public moment for poetry in the entire country, right? You know, 60 million people hear one poem at the same time, and it triggers a lot of things for people. So what happened? A few things that were, you know, things that I never knew were possible, right? You know, and I think a lot of this might happen if you won a Pulitzer or something like that, right? And a lot of our careers as poets is, you know, hanging in there and having faith that something beautiful and big will happen that might shift us, or not. Like, that's fine too. Like, I was at a point in my career where I was fine where I was. Of course, always dreaming for more. But anyway, so first of all, agents called from all over the place. That was nuts.
Mm.
Like, suddenly, because I had a drafted memoir about my childhood, about my growing up in Miami. So that was like, what, like um, interviewing agents on the phone. As soon as I got back off the stage and back into the senator's office, there were already people calling my speaker's agent to book me. So
Wow.
it was like, what? I thought I was going to walk the dog and get the mail and go back to my engineering day job, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, all sorts of, which again, these stories aligned for me because it was not the usual suspects. It was people I've read for the USDA, the FDIC, all sorts of immigrant advocacy groups, all sorts of LGBT groups, all sorts of nonprofits, all sorts of, I've done corporate events.
Mm.
And for me, again, being that kid that didn't have access to the arts, right? For me, that democratization of poetry was so inviting, right? It's kind of like I always thought of myself wanting to be a poet of the people, and that almost sounds a little pretentious, but what I mean by that is, it, I always thought we should put poetry out there, not wait for people to come to poetry. Kind of like the work you do, right? Like it's like, let's put it out there. Let's not wait for people to come. And so that idea of being almost like a poetry evangelist, right? Of being able to walk into rooms where people have never even seen or heard a living poet and be that person was really special. And so, but yeah, I spent about 10 years of my life just being on the road, about 70% of my time, which
Wow.
I never knew that was possible as a career. But I fully embraced it because I felt like I was doing something good, not for poetry itself, right, and for people themselves, not
Mm.
just because it's my career, but yeah, it was. There's a lot of venues. These places call you, you don't call them, right?
Yeah.
That I never knew
Yeah.
anything about. So it was like living the dream in a way, right? Like just making the flip side to that is that kind of exposure. I'm in some ways more afraid to publish now than
Mm.
before, right?
Mm.
Because you're out there, right? Like there's a lot of eyes on you. So it in a way that oh yeah, so that's it. Kind of ironic, but are people just saying yes, or do I have just yes people that are accepting poems, but they're not really up to par where it should be? And then the other great thing that started happening, people started asking me to write more occasional and commissioned poems and commemorative poems, like a poem for Boston Strong at the benefit concert. So that was another way of writing that I never knew. Like literally, like they're like assignments.
Yeah.
It's and so having the practice of what I learned from writing an occasional poem, the one today, really worked and helped to understand what that really means and how does that work and how do you do that and why would you do that, right?
Yeah.
So that was another sort of another door that opened, and another way of sort of not only another way of not only putting poetry out there, but also of writing poetry myself, another source of kind of inspiration.
Absolutely. And in that same spirit, I mean, you became Miami-Dade's first poet laureate and the Academy of American Poets education ambassador. So, I mean, you're Miami-Dade County. I mean, like you said, that is a bastion of culture, diversity. And, they never had a poet laureate before. And you tell
No.
us about kind of how I mean, and you strike me as the type of person. I mean, you just take the opportunities. You create the opportunities really for yourself. That I really do feel like you strike as that type of person. You do want to strike the iron, like you said. You want to be a poet of the people. Tell us, how did you come about being Miami-Dade's first poet laureate? Was that something you just kind of came in conjunction? They called you called them, you saw space, and you said you wanted to enter that space.
A little both. Miami-Dade County actually had a poetry ambassador role, which is the mayor loves poetry,
Mm.
and I mean, she's a big fan of poetry, and so this person works. It's part of the cultural, what I forget the exact department, but cultural affairs or something like that. But they have a
Mm.
poet. They had a poetry ambassador, and someone who's also a writer, obviously. And we were called. She was talking to me one day about like the possibility of creating the first poet laureateship. And I said, that's a great idea. And she asked me for people. And I thought, well, I have a bunch, but I'll do it if you want. Why
Yeah.
not, right? But again, it fits in line with my sort of my not my mission, and it's not my brand, but again, putting poetry out there. And so the ability anywhere I can be that person, that ambassador, that person that brings people poetry, that gets to sort of be the messenger of having people
Yes. Yeah.
changed by poetry. So I welcome that. and we did. My big project was something modeled after Robert Pinsky's project. It was called My Favorite Poem Project, and so we just went around the whole country doing different. Sorry, the whole county during different events, but just choosing people from firemen to like county commissioners to poets to artists to politicians to teachers, and just asking them to share their favorite poem and
Hmm.
the story behind it and how it changed their life, and with these wonderful conversations, right? Like, so that was great. Uh, with the Academy of American Poets, that's also sort of in the same vein. Once I saw the incredible reaction to that one poem, right, read, and I thought, what if, I just thought, how many kids there are out there, how many people there are out there that in our educational system really are thinking about how they don't get that exposure to poetry.
Hmm.
So I thought I got to change that, or I want to change that. I want to help change that. I want a little boy like me to know about poetry earlier in life and the arts in general. And so I got to talking to the Academy of American Poets, who serve, who's a big part of who they serve are educators. And I thought, well, I can't do this single-handedly, but if we team up with educators and give them a leg up, right, and thinking about giving them resources and tools to teach poetry in interesting and innovative ways, then the numbers, are exponential. Many hundreds, thousands of students run across their classrooms in their
Yeah.
lifetime, and so that's my role there. And that was sort of self-created too, because I just, again, I wanted poetry for the people, by the people, of the people,
Hmm.
so to speak.
Yeah, absolutely. And I really, again, I love that. And I really do commend you for, again, really putting poetry in a place, especially with your platform, that's so kind of touchable. It's so reachable. It's very commendable for you to be doing that, and especially in a place where you're living, Miami-Dade. So I want to move on a bit here. Now, in How to Love a Country, first off, that title is already an interesting title, and I would love to kind of find out more about how that title even came about. But in How to Love a Country, you write of America's, I would say, almost painful and beautiful contradictions, right? Beauty and its brokenness, right? I mean, at this point, looking at the world we live in today, Richard, I mean, do you believe poetry can still heal a nation, or are we at a different phase in life now? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, sure. So that book was an outgrowth of, um, again, the same question of home, right? But not just what home means to me, but what is the larger question of what home means to us. So a lot of that poetry is more the poetry of we than the poetry of me.
Mm.
Again, but with the same question, because, and traveling around and or just the response to tens of thousands of emails of people saying they finally felt like part of America. Anyway, but again, and then being on the road, right? What can a poem do in the world, right? How can a poem participate in some kind of civic discourse? What does a poem do? And so that book was really different for me in that sense. I dared to sort of step way outside my comfort zone in terms of just my sort of more autobiographical
Mm.
foundations, right? So, so that I wanted us all to look at that. That, like you said, what was the word you used? That something horrible beauty. What was it? the
Oh, I
that
mean,
that
beauty and
contradiction
brokenness.
of
It's
the
a
fragile beauty.
painful contradiction, but a
Brilliant,
beautiful
brilliant,
one.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I think that you could almost put a question mark behind that title, right? It's like how to love a country, question mark. What does that even mean? What is true? How do we love it?
Mm.
I think that broken beauty comes from two things. One is, as I like to say, my parents are more American than I could ever be,
Mm.
or more patriotic at least, and but because of the leap of faith and the sacrifices they made, the quintessential belief in the American dream and the values, the traditional values, and the whole promises of this country, which we take for granted, right? So, but they've always instilled in me a sense of optimism that no matter how bad things are, there's always something good to look at, right? And
Sure.
also their own countries, right? But that, yeah, there's a lot of broken stuff that we also have to look at. But I think to say that. I know where we are now. That book was published in before the 2016 election, and that we were already a bit broken, right?
Yeah.
And like you said, where we are now is like, so that's the question, and it's sort of maybe what I'm going to be writing around next. I don't, to be honest with you, man, I don't like saying that, that anything really changes the world per se, like blow, boom, like. But what I always do believe is that, art, a poem can change a person and a person can change the world. And what's weird, what we do as artists, right? It's like we never see the ripple effects of what we do.
Mhm.
Who knows if little Barack Obama read a poem by Maya Angelou or by,
Yeah.
or by Gwendolyn Brooks that said, I'm going to change the world. We do what we do, right? But we also do it in a quieter way. So I think that is the role of poetry. At least that's what I wanted to do in that book, because as artists, as poets, we're asking questions, hopefully, that aren't being asked. We're not just stating the obvious. Sometimes we need to state the obvious, but it's also art should give us a way out, or some way, not a way out, but another possibility, right? That we might be looking at. I think art also humanizes these issues that get abstracted by the news and by
Mhm.
social media, right? When you write poetry of witness, when you write a poem about a real person, there's a real face, there's real names, there's real tears, there's real smiles, there's real all that, right?
Yeah.
It becomes a real thing. Um, I don't quite know. I think I've been talking to a lot of my friends, as I'm sure you have too, and we're like, what is the role of poetry right now? What can we do? And part of what we're feeling too is that right now joy and beauty are radical as well, and that can also change things, right? If we can start looking at the beauty, and by that I don't necessarily mean a rose or something like that, but again, what are we
Yeah.
not looking at? Where is there something that can help these divide, help see, I wouldn't say heal these divides, but let's get people talking in some ways. And again, it's quiet work, right? But there's a lot of us, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's really interesting. The role of poetry becomes more and more important, and you've seen that in our country as things become more politically complex, as they are in Latin American countries and in oppressed countries, right? Where the poets and it's not even that they're writing political poems. It's just the fact that they dare to hope and dream. They
Yeah.
dare to say something that nobody is saying. And that's why you get, poets jailed in all these countries, unfortunately. But um, um, that's where I feel we're in starting to be in this moment. This is why we also have, right, you've even seen the poets that have originated from spoken word who have always carried a different, not a different kind of torch, but a much brighter torch in terms of social political issues, how
Mm.
they have become more a part of the forefront. Like now you have poets like Patricia Smith, or teachers at Princeton, right? That sense of the collective voice, the voice that sort of is about we and dares to question the we, is becoming more and more important. So yeah, I think every art and every discipline has to do their own part. But again, the work is quieter, or we don't always see it, right? And
Yeah.
it's the ripple takes a while, man.
So it's interesting, Richard, with you. I mean, you kind of answered this question a bit. You do see a balance of the art with the activism, or even in some ways, from while I'm hearing you say, you almost see them intertwined into one, right? You even said our joy is our resistance. That is a form of revolution in itself, just writing about the beauty. I mean, for you, I mean, how do you, because I do feel reading your work, there is a very deep, deep tenderness. There's a deep consideration for something, a nurturing for something. How do you? I mean, when you're confronting issues with history, pain, you write poems for marriage equality, reopening the U.S. embassy in Cuba, tragedy. There's triumph. How do you kind of keep your tenderness, right? How do you keep that beauty still as a thread in your work? I mean, where do you locate that for you? I mean, where do you find that within yourself?
Yeah, I think it comes down to empathy. And empathy is such a weird word in English because it's so close to sympathy, right? But
It
it's,
is.
real empathy is has a different kind of connotation. It's really about really stepping outside of yourself, right? But also, where does that come from? For me, I think it comes from maybe perhaps the empathy I wish I would have had, right? So,
Mm.
as an immigrant, as a gay man, um, as gay man with my grandmother who was also verbally abusive, I always think, I guess I side with kind of the underdog, and I think what I want to give them, instead of telling them you're the underdog or this is wrong or right, how can I uplift everyone, right? Like how can I open up new ways of looking at it? But also, you're right, it's always, I think, with love, somehow, with empathy, because um I think it's just a real deep belief in me. As the cliche goes, you can catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. And or to quote Michael Jackson, right? I'm a lover, not a fighter,
Mm.
right? Art. I think art. For me, and I think there's many ways of handling that, right? Different poets handle it different ways, which can be just as effective. But for me, it's very much ingrained in that always feeling like that other, and therefore the empathy that I'm just about putting out their empathy, right? And lifting people up, and saying, Jane Hirschfield, I think it was Jane Hirschfield, I might be misquoting this, is it's one of those things you hear at a cocktail party or something. But she said poetry is simply a hand reaching out and saying, "Me too."
Mm.
And I've never forgotten that, right? It's a hand
Mm.
that just says "Me too," and that "Me too" is not just the people it's not just my LGBTQ family. It's not just my immigrant family. It's all of us have felt pain. We've all felt displaced. We've all felt loss, right? We've all felt joy. We've all felt ecstasy and desire. And so it's just, yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Here's the poem, me too. And um, so that's part of what, and you're right. I've learned from a lot of times from writing occasional or commissioned poems that I think the tenderness that you feel coming through, even when it can be something like a poem for Boston Strong, which is something I didn't experience directly, something that was written for the people of Boston. Um, I think what you're sensing there is that um, this is a big lesson in terms of craft, that I realize an occasional poem isn't really just about the occasion, but it's about what one feels about the occasion. And in other words, like a poem, like every poem, poet's feelings have to really sort of guide the poem and inform the poem. And that's the tenderness I think you feel. And for me, just to give you that example of Boston Strong, my heart was really broken by the little boy Martin that passed, that died, and that was my emotional way into that poem, and saying, I have an emotional authority to write this now. I can write with honesty and with real
Mm.
feeling, and so. Again, even that poem was sort of a poem of empathy for the people of Boston and the victims and the survivors. So yeah, I always try to find that way in. That's my way into poetry a lot.
Absolutely. Oh, I love that. I love the individual that you quoted right there. Poetry is about, you give someone a poem, it's them just telling you "me too," and you reading it, you're saying, "Me too." So I love that, and I love that stayed with you, and I think that'll stay with the folks that are listening. So thanks so much for that. Now moving quite along here, yeah, you have your memoir, "The Prince of Los Cocuyos." I
Very
said
good.
that. If I
Yeah.
incorrectly said that, please correct me.
Yeah.
But it's being developed for television. My goodness, congratulations. Now, I
Yeah.
mean, what is that like? You've already had so many "I've made it" moments. Is that another one, just to kind of keep sticking that nail in that wall? I mean, that is huge. And that's so amazing. I mean, what's it like to really see your life translated into a whole new medium, a TV show? And really tell us about how that process began and what that's gonna transform into, as we look forward to seeing that on television.
Sure, sure. And I should warn people, though. I mean, development. There's still one big hurdle after that, which is the studio that actually buys the.
Yeah.
Now we're working on it, right? But still, to even get to development is a big deal. So
Yes.
I'm not downplaying that, um, but it's still there's still that one big hurdle. Again, you were saying like how many times I go after things or not. So happened to be, I was a speaker at the Aspen Ideas Festival, and I met Michael Eisner, who is the former CEO of Disney World. And And I didn't even know he had like a company now that options books and whatnot. But I was just, so I told him, I mean, guess how many times I've been in Disney World? And he's like, how many? I'm like, 58 times. Because
Mm.
when you're in Miami, that's what you do, right? Anyway, we got to talking about just that it was just a very, for me, it was just very, I don't care if you're Michael. I mean, I do care that you're Michael Eisner, but I was just really wanted to connect with him, like we're the same love I have for this place. And so it turned out he had this option company and he optioned the book. And so he's also made me a co-writer because he's smart enough, I think, that he said, it's such a particular, unique, and important story that we don't want someone else to like be messing it up that are
Yeah.
not really getting the nuances of it. So he's very aware of that. So I'm working with someone who knows more of the mechanics of like what
Yeah.
works, because I've never written for television. Um, what's been great, it is a big dream come true for me, and in the sense that I'm kind of a TV holic. Again, for reasons we were talking about earlier, TV was my window into this country that I thought
Mm-hmm.
that I
Yeah.
wanted to belong to,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like the
Yeah.
whole, the I Dream of Jeannie, the whole. So I always wanted to see um, what it's always been a dream to have, like, well, when I wrote the book, I almost wrote it episodically because I was like, I hope this is a TV show someday, because I could see the whole Blanco family. So that's just like exciting in and of itself. What's really weird, not weird, but what's different, of course, which is kind of like a little like playwriting, although you have more tricks when you do TV because you have lighting and sound and all these other things going on. And,
Mm.
it's the whole, and you could cut and edit, all this other stuff. But, as opposed to writing poetry or even a memoir where you're really detailing things and scenes and the furniture in the room, it's really mostly about dialogue and plot. And so learning how to pull back from that and letting, if you've ever read a script, like even for something like Seinfeld, it's not even that funny.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it's the magic of what the actors bring to it, how it all unfolds on that stage. So it's also been a process of trusting and letting go. As a
Mm.
writer, it's enough. Like I have to, the cup has to be this color, or like that's not exactly the right food for this scene. Things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah. No, but what an exciting process. I mean, I know, like you said, you're still waiting for that studio, but I mean, to even be in development, I mean, in that kind of already that hookup with Michael Eisner. I mean, I
Yeah.
think you're good as golden, honestly, Richard. I don't think you're going to really have much of a problem with him
Oh,
backing you.
yeah.
What,
He's
so,
such a champion too. And we're
yeah.
talking about how people feel things, so he's like, he loves the story because he's like this Jewish kid that grew up in, Brooklyn, like completely feeling like the other. So,
Yeah.
so that's the hand too. He just adores the story. And like, what would a Cuban and a Jewish guy have in common? Well, it's still diaspora in a way, right? And that in a way it is, right?
Tell me kind of, I mean, and again, you hear kind of these these moments that you have, and I'm sure when you look back on just how opportunities have came about for you, I'm sure it's been a collection of smaller moments where you didn't even come into it thinking that. I mean, if you could even speak to people that are listening to this that are novice poets, they could only dream of a career like yours, Richard. I mean, but what would you say to them though? What would you say to them in terms of expansion, maybe of poetry, looking outside the box than maybe the rigid way in which academia, schooling has taught us that writing, specifically poetry, can box us into? What would you say to people that want to really see their career flourish and don't really have maybe the open mind, but are looking for that?
Yeah. So, I think this applies to most everything. You obviously have to show up and you have to do the work, right, and try to and constantly honing your skills, right, and forgetting accolades, because you got to get back to that. It's just you and the poem, right? It's just you and
Yeah.
the. I guess it depends on what stage you are. A lot of my undergraduates get a little ahead of themselves, and they're like, "We want to publish." I'm like, "Listen, your job right now is to learn how to write the best poem you can, right? And
Yeah.
there'll be time to publish. Don't worry about that right now. I mean, yes, share your work if you want." put it on Instagram if you want, but don't feel like it's a vocation, not a career right now, right? Well, it's always a vocation in some ways, right? So I guess it depends where you are, but I guess I'll tell you what I've done. Um, you just you just stick it. You just have to show up. I mean, I can't explain it another way. I would say that, when we have other things in our lives, even my engineering, right? I gave up promotions.
Hmm.
I At some point, I told my boss I only want to work 30 hours a week. I want to get benefits, and because they already knew I was a writer and I was out of my first book. But I guess what I want to say is there's a danger in losing sight of that dream, right?
Hmm.
And then just not writing or just so and not participating in that world anymore. And so I always say set up your life to sort of feed that part of you, right? If you're real
Yeah.
serious about it, because most of us will have to do something else, right? Unless we're trust fund babies and are just living off whatever the trust,
There
right?
you
We're
go.
going to have
Yeah.
to find some other kind of livelihood. Not only that, it's healthy to have something else sometimes too that can, so so I would say to always, again, show up. The other little tidbit of advice, I would say it's very hard to be in that space about career expansion and all that stuff and be in the creative space at the same time.
Hmm.
And so you should try to compartmentalize those. Like, first of all, you need to have work, right? To get anywhere, right? You're not going to get anywhere without good work. That's work, or and good work, I mean, that's relative too, right? That's subjective. But so what I try to do is just have moments of, or not moments, or really periods of intense creativity,
Hmm.
and then create something. Usually it's a book, and then I just switch to complete marketing. Give me a reading, like, let me do this, right? Like, it's time to hit the road. It's time to send to reviewers. It's time, and that's another part of our job, right? But it's hard to do those at the same time because you're kind of, that other stuff. You're putting yourself out there in a different way. That's is important, but it's also not the same thing as putting yourself out in your own work, right? The chances you're taking with you sitting at the desk, which that's important. So I like to compartmentalize those things, and I think that's part of how you keep on moving forward. And again, there's moments to be out there and actively pursue stuff that's going to help your.
Yeah.
I'm going to use the word vocation instead of career because I think that's really what it is. And then those opportunities start happening and multiplying. Because the other thing is also, I always tell being part of community of writers, that's important, right? Like, just being in community, going to poetry readings, going to if you have an opportunity to teach a workshop, let's say at a community center, being part of poetry in some other way too. That's part of what makes us energetically feel like, keeps on lifting us up, keeps us feeling like we are writers, that we are also, there's other people in our same shoes too. So yeah, I would, and I guess the bottom line is you got to remain true to your voice, and that covers a lot of ground. But there is a lot of intimidation out there to write like so and so or do this like so and so.
Yeah.
Like, find. I mean, I'm not saying finding our voice. I don't want to excuse poetry. That's not that's my voice. That's not what I'm saying. If the poem is not where it should be, or the poetry isn't where it should be, but it's really being authentic to your voice. And I think there's a lot of danger in that when we start thinking about MFA programs, we start writing like each other. So always keep that in mind and find something that you really, really care, an obsession. What is home? Something that is really a deep part of your big question in life, and let every poem sort of start from there. And the rest will come, I think.
Absolutely. The rest is still unwritten. We love it. We love it. We love it. All right. Well,
All right. Exactly.
Exactly. Shout out Natasha Bedingfield. There we go. Now, all right, Richard, now you said, there's a quote that you said, great art keeps asking questions. Now, if you could leave us all with one question that we want to keep asking about home, about love, about life, or about America, what would it be?
Yeah, I think we've been sort of circling around it, I think, because I think, the questions I have in my head are also thinking like, what am I going to be writing about next and how and why and how that's going to happen. But I've been thinking, and I think it started with How to Love a Country. The question on my mind, of course, okay, we can say, I have almost, an epigenetic trauma of exile because of my mother being pregnant. I mean, I'm really scared about what's happening right now, right, in our country. I mean, there are days when like, am I going to have to do like my mom and like leave and like start a whole new life somewhere else? Literally, because there's no other choice. So the question is, I'm asking, how much can I do? What should I be doing? Is it just poetry? Right? Because this, the pen is mightier than the sword, but the sword's out there, So I'm trying to see what is that space. How, like what should poetry be doing in the world right now for me and for us all, but also beyond the sort of very sort of pat, sort of let's heal the divide kind of thing. And maybe this has something to do with empathy, but I'm feeling like there's this shifting momentum in some weird way that this country is still, our country is still very much stuck on this idea of independence, right? We haven't shaken that off for good reason, right? Like we broke away from whatever, but really, if we're going to survive, it's really about how do we shift that thinking to interdependence, right? Like that's the next highest level of thinking. And I'm thinking that's kind of what I started, I think, hoped to show in the inaugural poem, that whether you know it or not, we're all connected, right? And all this survival really belongs with all of us are a cog, a gear in this thing called life. We kind of learned that in the pandemic, but soon forgot it, right? Yep. So that's the question. It's really a question of what is interdependence? How do we get there? Like, what does that look like? And yes, it's our country, but that's a big word. It's also our communities. It's also our family. All the divides that are big and small out there, and how do we use language to some degree, and that comes from that space.
Absolutely. I love that as the one question he would leave us to keep on asking. All right, Richard, our last question of the interview, of the day, of the night. We ask every poet on the Poet Speaks podcast. Richard, why do you need to get your words out?
Okay, I don't know, but there might be two sides of the same question, two sides of the same coin, right? So, and I always tell my students this, which they kind of freak out, but I tell them writing a poem is the stupidest, most arrogant, self-serving, dumbest thing you can do in the world. And then I also tell them it's also the most generous, selfish, selfless, gregarious, honest, most beautiful thing you can do in the world. And I proceed to explain that, when a poem first begins in us, we have to come with all the blood, sweat, and tears. We have to come with all, everything that, if not, why bother? We have to believe that our lives need art, right? And I need to make art out of this. Why? To understand it. Every time I finish a poem, or almost finish a poem, I feel like I learned something new about myself, about my world, about people in my life, about a memory that I've had for 30 years haunting me, about a current event, about politics. And I think when I discover that for myself, this is how it turns from something selfish into something selfless, because then that discovery is there, again, the hand that says, me too. And then your poem is a gift in the world. And that's why I write my poems, and that's why I want them out there, is for those stories that come back to you that say, that poem made me think of when blank, blank, blank. That poem, I never thought about this, but that poem shifted something in me. That poem, because what they're seeing is what happened to me in some ways. They're seeing it in their own lives in maybe a different context. And so that's why I want it out there. Because it does no good just sitting on in my notebooks or on my desk or in my computer.
It really doesn't. It does no good just sitting there. It has to be out in the world. All right. Well, Richard, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being on the podcast today. And before we wrap up, please do, tell us, what is the rest of 2025 looking like for you? Any events you want to tell us about? And please do drop below, tell us links, social media, websites where we can check out all of your amazing work.
Tony, right now I'm teaching 2 classes, which keeps me kind of busy. Just doing, some gigs here and there. I have something very exciting that just started 2 weeks ago. So I am starting to do through my website online courses, book consultations, portfolio consultations. Just trying something new. There's a free one coming up on November 20th, which is just called. It's just a forum. Again, free of charge, and it's just so you think you're not a poet. That's the name, and it's just I want to share my story about like what we talked about, like because for a while I also had sort of this imposter syndrome, right? How can I be an engineer and a poet? Till everything started really gelling together for me. And so I want to share that story, and I want others to share their stories about, and again, sort of how do we make our way through our vocations while we have other jobs, some of which we love, some of which we might not love. So just opening up that conversation. So that I'm really excited about that venture. I have yet to start writing again for my last book because I'm that kind of writer. I told you I shift gears, and now I'm like all in out there mode. So that's the question that I'm asking everyone, and that I'm asking myself. That's probably going to be what the next book is. Other than that, yeah, just so you can always check out my website, www.richardblanco.com with a hyphen, and all my events are listed there, as well as latest news. Also, I love using social media, not just for me, but really to uplift other poets, uplift poetry in general. So there's things out there, quotes, book recommendations, these kinds of things that hopefully you can get turned on to. If you were to kill me, I don't know my hashtags, my handles, but Richard Blanco Poet, and then one is Poet Richard Blanco, mostly Instagram and Facebook. But there's not too many Richard Blancos out there. The only other one is a real estate agent and a soccer player, so you'll know if you're in the wrong.
You told three different people. So, all right, perfect. Well, thank you again so much, Richard. Everyone, Richard's links will be down below in the description box, no matter where you're listening to this amazing podcast. Again, all right. Thank you so much for being on the podcast today, Richard.
Thank you. And thank you, Amanda, for all you're doing and all you do. Absolutely. We're all in the same team.
Absolutely. Again, everyone, Richard's links will be down below, no matter where you're listening to this podcast. Again, this is the Poet Speaks podcast. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye, everyone.